Committee. Thank you very much for joining us today. So we have finally made it to the last meeting. This is the 6th one, and I'm also happy to say that there is no way this one goes 90 minutes. So I would fully expect to be giving you some of your time back. The things that I have planned to chat with you about today really are not going to take the full time at all, I don't think. So yeah, we'll go through that. Well, I have a slide actually. We go through our general spiel, and then we are going to have a couple quick presentations actually by me. The first will be about the first past the post voting option that we've laid in front of you. And the second one's going to be about the option of just putting more time in between the two elections. Neither of these two options really warrant 90 minutes of discussion, we felt like, so we thought we would put them together and just kind of give you a quick presentation about those. And then we're going to have an engagement update from our Communications and Engagement Director, Grace Ramirez, and then we are going to discuss kind of the next steps of what this looks like. Obviously, this is the last meeting, so let's just chat about what your deliberation might look like and how to finally get that recommendation. So the same meeting mechanics as always. We only have committee members and staff up here in this actual segment of Zoom. All meetings are recorded and added to the committee's webpage. Please remember to mute yourself if you are not speaking so that we don't have any odd background noise. And additionally, we are still receiving comments through the Charter Clerk email inbox that we've set up specifically for this process. So we will be sending you those comments so that you have them in front of you when you are deliberating about what your recommendation may be. So as always, what we are doing here is we're evaluating a few options in front of us for our problem. And we're actually going to be talking about a couple of these bullets right here in this meeting. We're going to be talking about first past the post, and we're going to be talking about putting more time in between the two elections. I will be perfectly honest. This is probably going to come across as the most boring political science lecture of your lives, and I'm very sorry. It's just when you approval and ranked choice voting, it was very easy to identify advocates. You don't really see too many advocates of plurality voting, so I decided to try and cobble together a presentation myself, for which I will apologize to you. Okay, so let's take us directly into first past the post voting. First of all, I think we were also kind of mixing up some terms as we went through this process. We also called this plurality voting a few times. I'm going to try and really stick to just first past the post and have that kind of be the term that we're talking with. The reason we have this as one of the options alongside ranked choice voting and approval voting is because we have this problem with our election timeline. And one of the possible solutions we were thinking of when we were brainstorming was, well, we would get rid of the conflict if there was no second election. And then that if there was no second election, there wouldn't be a conflict at all. So obviously, ranked choice could do that. Approval could also do that for us as well. We wanted to be forthcoming in what the options are, and to be perfectly honest, first past the post voting is also would achieve the same thing if we eliminated the runoff election. And so the current charter language that's relevant here is in 8.2.19, where we have the current requirement that to be elected for mayor, auditor, clerk and recorder, and district council member, you must receive a majority of votes, which is, of course, the genesis for our runoff election. To be perfectly honest, this is the most familiar voting method for all of us. We do this in state and federal elections. This is where the voter just casts a vote for one candidate, and the candidate with the most votes after that one election wins. So what you see here is I've taken our ballot from the 2018 general election. It's really simple. We have the vote for one voter instruction. This actually wouldn't be terribly different than our general municipal ballot instruction as well. And then we have what the results look like over here to the right of your screen. So in this case, Diana did get over 50%, but whoever just got the most votes at the end of that one round would be elected into office. To be perfectly honest, coming up with the pros of first past the post voting was interesting and actually kind of challenging. What I did come up with, though, is the first thing would be voter familiarity. So like I said, this is something that we do and we've been doing in our state and federal elections for a long time. So the concept wouldn't be terribly difficult, I think, for voters to understand or get around. it certainly wouldn't be as large of a change as some of our other options as well. So the communication of what's going on could be a bit simpler. Additionally, there's the cost savings. You've heard this argument before from us. So if we were able to eliminate the runoff election, we would save the city close to $1 million for a citywide runoff. And then there's just the simplicity. Instead of having 2 elections in order to determine voter intent, we would have 1 election and eliminate the conflict altogether. There are some pretty big cons, though, to this voting method. The first, I have on here not progressive. And what I really mean by that is it's not really recognizing probably the arc of progression in terms of voting methods. So right now there seems to be a lot of discussion in the community and nationwide about whether first past the post voting is good at all. And that's where alternative vote methods like ranked choice voting and approval have come into the conversation. We are not sure that first past the post is leading to elected officials that maybe accurately reflect the will of the people. The second bullet here is no majority rule, and I will have a couple slides after this that will demonstrate what I'm talking about. It would, if we eliminate the requirement that somebody get a majority of votes in order to be elected to office, it's possible that someone could be elected with 15 or 20%, depending on the number of candidates running. And this would also probably reintroduce the spoiler effect into our election system here in Denver. So let's first take the first con, excuse me, which is no majority rule. And I have taken an example from the 2019 municipal election here in Denver. And I chose District 1 because that had a nice set of candidates who were running for that office in the first election in May. We actually had 7 named candidates for that election in May. And we had a space for the write-in vote, but there were no actual write-in candidates eligible at that time. So what you see here on the right is the vote total for all 7 candidates. And you can see that obviously now Councilwoman Amanda Sandoval, she came in with the most amount of votes, but the other 6 really kind of ranged, from the single digits up to close to 16 or 17%. So there was a wide range of vote totals amongst these 7 candidates. So what this really means is if we didn't have the runoff in 2019, this beautiful little pie chart that I just figured out how to make demonstrates that really someone would have become councilperson with only 31% of the vote. And what that means is everyone else who didn't make it into office, if you combine them together, they would be 68.8% of the vote. They would be the majority. So in fact, if we had done this in 2019, the majority of voters would have voted for someone who didn't make it into office. This method of voting, if we were to eliminate the runoff and go with this, would really kind of attack that idea that when you get into office, you have the majority of support behind you. And looking forward, we also want to make very clear that our campaign finance team, we are expecting a lot more candidates in 2023 compared to 2019, because we now have the Fair Elections Fund. And we think that fund's existence is going to lead to more candidates running for office in 2023. And so the problem that we could see from 2019 is actually going to be greater in 2023. The next con that we really have for the first past the post voting system, if we were to eliminate the runoff, is we would be reintroducing the spoiler effect into our elections. And to demonstrate this point for everyone watching at home, I have taken a hypothetical citywide race where the total votes cast were about 147,000 votes. Assuming that there were 3 candidates running for that office, they split about 1/3, but give or take a few. So candidate B actually came out on top with 37%. Candidate A has about 31%, and candidate C has about 32%. Now, what I mean by the spoiler effect is let's assume that candidate A and candidate C have the same voter platform, have the same campaign platform, where they are anti-development, represented by my wonderful Dutch windmills, and candidate B is pro-development with this wonderful little city building that I have here. What this would mean is that, and what the spoiler effect is candidate A would actually be the spoiler here because they have the lowest amount of votes, the lowest percentage. Theoretically, they spoiled the vote for candidate C, who got a little bit more. But those 2 candidates with the same platform, got 63% of the vote. And so I tried shading those two candidates this similar shade of blue so that you can see in the pie chart what this means. So that means 63% of the voters in that district or in that citywide race supported anti-development. But the person who got into office is the pro-development candidate because they got 37% of the vote. So if this were, excuse me, let me take that back. Because there were three candidates like this, because we weren't able to whittle down to two and have the runoff election, there would be the reintroduction of this spoiler effect back into our election system here in Denver. And we think that you should be aware of those cons as you're evaluating these options in front of you and weighing what to recommend for the future of Denver elections. I'm going to pause for questions there. I didn't really want to belabor the point of what first past the post voting is, only because I think we all have a pretty good grasp of it. But before I move on to our timeline discussion, I want to pause there to see if anyone has any questions or thoughts about what we just went over.
Yeah. I got my hand up first. I don't know if we're using the hand raise. I don't know that anybody in the group here was suggesting that we go back to plurality voting, which we used before we had ranked choice back in 1916, and then went to the runoff after we got rid of ranked choice. I remember one of our first meetings, Dan, early on, we had just very brief discussions about how to actually do the simplest thing, which is to fix the deadline issue with the runoff system. The runoff produces a true majority winner in every case. So I'd like to incorporate a discussion of that and not use this as a sort of a false dilemma, right? Because I don't think anybody wants to go back to electing a mayor or a council member or an auditor with less than 50% of the vote. So maybe at the end of this discussion, we could revisit what we talked about in the first meeting, first couple of meetings about fixing the runoff deadline, either by moving it or by using a different ballot form for military and overseas voters so that they can submit in one mailing their choice were there to be a runoff in the races for which they're eligible to vote. We know of other states and cities that have runoff elections well within 45 days after the first election and still found ways to abide by the federal guidance. So I just wanted to put that on the table. Oh, and the other thing I wanted to observe was that none of the municipal races that I've ever tracked was there anything as stark as your example of the three. I think it gives, at the municipal level, the anti-development, development, or whatever kind of a dichotomy you want to set up among candidates, doesn't really work that way. I couldn't tell you in District 1 whether Dave Sabados or Mike Soma or Sabrina were anti-development, pro-development. I don't think that nuance at the local level is as much a factor as it would be if it were Donald Trump versus Joe Biden, right? Or if it were Cory Gardner versus John Hickenlooper. We have nonpartisan races. So platforms at the local level, especially with 7 candidates, the voters in District 1 probably didn't even know 6 of them. You know, they knew Amanda because of La Casita, right? Because they ate there their whole lives. So I think that distinction blurs at the local level. So that would be my couple of observations. Thanks.
No, that's fair. I think I was trying to be conscious of the fact that we do have people that are watching these after we post them on the website, and for the sake of simplicity, trying to demonstrate, how do I visually show the spoiler effect if
Sure.
That's going to be reintroduced.
Sure.
And that's a very good point too about why this is in front of you. Or at least I thought it was kind of disingenuous to put in front of you ranked choice and approval without really recognizing that this is also out there. We kind of didn't, like you said, with the false dilemma, we didn't want you to think that you only had those 2 options instead of this one as well.
Right. And what I'm saying is, no one wants to go back to that and have more than 2 options. We have the simple option, just fixing what we have, which we know produces a true majority winner.
Thank you. All right. Well, that moves nicely into the next discussion, or at least presentation, I just want to walk you guys through, which is our timeline issue. So obviously this is what we teed up in the first meeting, which is we have one charter provision that talks about or requires us to follow state election laws. And under state election law, we automatically mail ballots to military and overseas voters 45 days before election day. And we mail to domestic voters about 3 weeks before election day, between 22 and 18 days. And then we have this other charter provision that requires us to conduct the runoff election about 1 month after the general. So obviously 30 days conflicts with 45 days, and that's a problem for us that we all swore we did not want to experience again after 2019. What this looks like just on a very simple calendar and how this played out in 2019 is May 7th was our municipal election day. And that meant that March 23rd was the deadline for us to mail military and overseas ballots to our military and overseas voters. That also meant that April 15th was the first day to mail ballots to our domestic voters, and our vote centers opened on April 29th. We also have some deadlines that occur after election day. It's not like we just wrap up election administration on the night of the election. We also have signature cures, which under ordinance, we were given until May 15th, about 8 days. And actually, it was still possible for someone to ask for a recount as well. So someone had the ability to ask for a recount in this municipal election all the way through May 17th. Luckily, given the timeline conflict we were experiencing, we didn't have anyone ask for a recount because that certainly would have delayed us even more. So I'm now introducing red dots, which signifies the runoff election. And as you can see in 2019, what this really meant, if we were administering these two elections with the timeframes that we are normally administering elections under, the 45-day military and overseas mailing deadline occurred even before municipal election day. That actually occurred on April 20th. Clearly, because of this conflict, we weren't able to meet that. We didn't know who the top two were at that point. So these red dots actually begin before we even get to municipal election day. So this is how this played out. April 20th was technically military and overseas deadline for the runoff. May 13th was the first day, if we were following normal timelines, to mail ballots to domestic voters for the runoff election. And that even occurred before there was the cure deadline for the general municipal election of May 15th. So clearly, this is just a quick visual to demonstrate the conflict that we experienced in 2019. So let's talk about what would obviously be ideal if we were going to address this calendar. Ideally, we would have all of the blue dots occur first. We would conduct the municipal election, and it would be nice, tied up in a bow, and then we would be able to conduct the runoff election after that. Typically, what you see in a normal election under state law is that we have our ballot content certified to us about 60 days before election day. That gives us enough time to design the ballot, translate the ballot, get it to the ballot printer, and have them start printing things and out into the mail by the 45-day military and overseas deadline. That is the neatest way that we could be doing this. Election one occurs, we figured out who's the top two for every race if necessary, and then we go to election number two. In talking with our interim elections director, we think that we would need ideally probably about 75 days in between the two election days. We have about 30 now. We could even do 60 some odd days. But at the very least, what the crux of this is we need at least a month more in between these two election days if we're going to do it like this. So what this looks like in the 2023 election, or excuse me, the 2023 regular calendar is the runoff is always in June and officers take office in July. We're not really advocating for at this point, or not really fans, I guess I would say, of pushing the runoff later, because I think that would probably put some stress on just the transition of government to making sure that everyone can take office and do everything that they need to do by July. So we actually were thinking of moving the general municipal earlier in the year. We could move that to the first Tuesday in April or something like that. That would give us about a month more than what we're used to, which could get us to the very nice and neat election one, election two timeline. The other thing that this is going to just impact, though, is the candidate petition deadline. So right now, We would also have to, I think, tie that into the charter amendment if we were to propose this to voters to move up that candidate petition deadline as well. So realistically, if we moved our general municipal to April, we're probably starting the candidate petition process in December of the year before. Just to be aware of that, that's really kind of the big thing that would have to be moved as well if we make this move. Yeah, that's my last slide actually on the timeline. Like I say, this is probably the most narrowly tailored option in front of us all for the conflict that we're experiencing. I'll open it up there for any questions or comments from the committee.
We actually did, excuse me, we actually did have less time between the runoff and the inauguration, and it was moved back. And Stephanie O'Malley is on the call. She might be able to weigh in on this. It was when in 1991, when Mayor Webb won the runoff, and no one really knew what was going to happen. And there was so little time to put an administration together. And I think that is when we moved inauguration back to the third Monday in July. I think it used to be the first Monday. So they added 2 more weeks so that no future administration had to face such a compressed time frame. So we did do that once. I think the other narrowly tailored approach, instead of expanding the time between the municipal and the runoff, although that would give time for a really good campaign that could really focus on who the alternatives are, is to look at how other states have managed to comply with the uniformed overseas balloting. I forget what the acronym stands for, Dan, pardon me.
UOCAVA, yeah, that's okay.
UOCAVA, okay. Sounds like a brand of coffee. How do other states that manage to have runoffs within a more compressed time frame, how do they handle those UOCAVA voters? And I think we need to have a good evaluation of that before we can make a really measured and informed choice here on what to recommend. Because other cities and states manage to do this, and they do it legally. And so how do they do that?
Yeah, I know, states, especially the southern states that have runoffs like we just saw in Georgia, they'll do ranked choice for military and overseas voters just for that subset of voters that they don't have to mail out or do something again twice.
Did I ask, you addressed this with me before in some email exchange a while back, I think, because the state of Mississippi, they had SB and whoever their senator is right now were in a runoff a couple of years ago. And I was shocked. It was like within 2 weeks of the election, of the main election or something like that. It was much shorter compressed time frame than what we saw in Georgia with the recent Senate races. Is that correct?
Yeah, I don't remember off the top of my head the time frame, but yeah, it's very quick. I'm sorry.
Okay.
But you are correct though. It's a very compressed timeline, and based on the research, that's how they're getting around this. They're just treating military and overseas voters, only that subset of voters, a little differently by mailing them the ranked preference or the second ballot even sometimes.
Right.
So
you know how that would be counted in a runoff, because their second or third choice might not be the person who made the runoff, for example. Right. So would that be a discarded ballot?
Those are good questions. I actually haven't gone that far into the research,
Okay.
I'm wondering if we could probably connect with someone through Election Center into one of the southern states to say, like, look, how do you do this?
That'd be great to know.
We could hear how they go through that experience.
Exactly. All right. I like to know that so we can make a really informed choice. Thanks.
So Dan, I do have a question. I think I asked this early on, and I'm still not clear given this presentation today and what was said early on in one of our first or second meetings. Is the challenge with meeting deadlines under the current charter provisions more a challenge for election staff, or is it a challenge for the voters themselves? I need to understand, where is the challenge? And last time the response to this question was with both, but I'm trying to understand if it's with both the voters and the staff, how is it that we've been able to manage these elections, particularly on the voter and the staff side, without these suggested revisions that we've been presented with?
Yeah, so I think the clear answer is this is more so a problem for the staff. I think when we kind of give you the answer of both, we were really thinking, well, we're also seeing this drop off in the runoff. So is that indicative of a problem for the voters as well? But no, this is an administration problem. And this has been a problem for really only the 15 and 19 elections, because it was 2013 where the state law changed to make that automatic mailing of ballots in the state law and the state election code. What I wasn't here in 15, but what we did in 2019 is, quite frankly, we adopted an emergency rule that just said, we will deal with these conflicts as best we can, and we will mail ballots out as fast as we can. And we adopted a rule to that effect because we just felt like that might give us some sort of legal cover. We also, though, we did pilot a program in 2019 where we permitted military and overseas voters to use a system called Votes to cast their ballots over their smartphones. It was based on blockchain technology, and we partnered with a vendor to do that. So because we partnered in that one specific election, it didn't cost us anything, but that was how we got around this in 2019. We essentially let people cast their ballots over blockchain technology.
So can you, as a follow-up, can you drill down a little bit about the challenges with staff? What does that mean? What are the challenges specifically?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, so part of what we are experiencing is we essentially had to design the ballot on election night, the first election, with the prayer that nothing changed. And I think the clerk's race is, sorry to bring this up, the clerk's race is a good example of that. It was very close. And as we started counting those ballots, because we're never truly done counting ballots, or I shouldn't say that. Oftentimes we're not done counting ballots on election night. Now with the mail ballot system, people drop off closer to election day. By the time we actually go to the city, all the drop boxes, bring those ballots back, it's generally the next day that we're done. We also then have under our code, oh, sorry.
I said, if we're lucky.
Yeah, if we're lucky.
Yeah.
It's been a few days before. We also have an 8-day window after election day to let people cure signatures or other problems with their ballot. So let's say they forgot to sign their signature or sign their envelope. There was a discrepant envelope or discrepant signature. That essentially tacks on a week. And if we have a really close race where those cures could change something, then we don't know who to put on the ballot for the runoff election. The other problem we have right now is someone could request a recount. And a recount would push us even more days out after the first election. We don't think that would really change the results at all because we're very confident in what we do. But we have this process after election day as well, where if anything was ever close, we wouldn't know who to put on that ballot for the runoff election. And on top of that, we have to design the ballot. We then have to translate the ballot and be ready for that. We also have to work with the print vendor in order to make sure that all the instructions are right. We have the appropriate vote centers in the appropriate places, depending on who's in the runoff. So we really have to have all these contingencies in place for where the runoff might be in the city. That also impacts voter instructions. So we're turning those around in a really quick turnaround to give the print vendor enough notice to let them know, here's what you have to print, here's what you have to put together, and here's what you have to get out in the mail so that voters have that ballot in enough time to actually vote it. We actually had to switch print vendors in 2019 because the print vendor we had at the time couldn't handle the tight turnaround. So that added a little bit more stress to our election staff as well in 2019. We ended up having to go with an entirely new vendor because our other one couldn't handle it. And we have to translate everything into Spanish as well too.
And can I
So what I'm hearing, go ahead, Paul.
Yeah, sorry, Stephanie, I didn't mean to interrupt. So everything that Dan said is absolutely true. I think, one of the things that we have to think about anytime we talk about, changes to our election administration policies, rules that get changed, we have to remember, and as you know this, former Madam Clerk, Stephanie, one of the things that people have to realize is these aren't machines. These are human beings that are working, election judges, all that other stuff. So these, there is a true impact on operations. Any kind of tweak to our model, anything that we do has that kind of impact. We're able to do it. We got the best in the business. However, the one thing that we've come very close, as Dan is absolutely, we've come very close to being in that time crunch, and it does raise some legal concerns in terms of staying within state compliance as well too. But one of the things that we really have to address in terms of how it impacts voters is that, we want folks to be able to, in our voter-centric model, to be able to vote on an equal playing field in the same model and have the same amount of time to be able to do that. So it really creates a disservice. And what's happening is now that, if we don't extend the timeline and the time frame for this to take place, what we're doing is creating a separation and an inequity for folks who are overseas, for our UACAVA voters, to be able to vote. They have to now vote in an entirely different model, or also have a shorter amount of time in which they can make those decisions, right? And so what we want to be able to do is make sure that there's equality being applied to all of our voters, to make sure that they have the time they need to go through their ballots, study the runoff, right? Study the issues, and be able to vote in an educated way and not in a way that's rushed. So I think, that's what's been working, and that's the trend, right? That's what we're seeing, is that folks have the opportunity, that extended time. And that's the beautiful thing about mail-in ballots, is that you have that opportunity to sit and really study the issues or the different candidates and make an informed decision. And, less than 45 days, it gives them a completely complete disadvantage. And I think what we're trying to do is really impact operations in a good way, and then also the voting experience for folks.
Okay, thank you, Clerk Lopez. What I was going to comment on, back to Dan's comments, were, it seems to me that you've described some stresses, and Paul, you supported this, on the administrative and operational concerns. And my question in response to that is, well, are those things that can be retooled outside of changing a timeline? I don't know. Excuse me?
I think that's somebody else.
Okay, I'm just trying to understand that. And if the challenge, as Councilman Flynn has pointed out, is with our UOCAVA voters and their experience being different than, our domestic voters, is there an opportunity to address that issue outside of, for them, rather than changing the entire elections construct by adding more time? And I don't expect you to answer those questions now, but I certainly
I could answer that question. No, I could definitely answer that question and give you an honest answer. And that answer is no. We don't. And every time we do, it's literally, we're throwing the dice. And there's just so many different things that can impact an election. The size of the ballot now will increase with the fact that, Measure 2E has passed, right? And I think, you're going to see a lot more folks appearing on some of these ballots. And I think we're really cutting it close. And it's a matter of also risk management, risk mitigation as well, too. This is something that I want to make sure that we are giving ample time and making sure that voters have a level playing field, no matter whether they're here, stateside, in Denver, submitting their mail-in ballot, or if they're serving the country abroad, or if they happen to be abroad, that they have that equal opportunity for their votes to be cast. And I think that's mission number one. And two is just making sure Denver's within state law, and that we don't come anywhere close to potentially violating that or disrupting the model. So yeah, so short answer is no. Short answer is no, not at this point. And that's why we're addressing this, and it's going to take a charter change.
Thank you.
Next hand raised is Council President Gilmore.
Thank you, Dan, and thanks for the presentation. I share Councilman Flynn's concerns, and thank you, former Clerk O'Malley, as well, asking the question, is this a staff issue or is it a voter issue? And I would like to understand, especially from the domestic side and the military side, how many issues you saw in the previous election. What are the numbers? What were the concerns? It would just be helpful, and you might have already presented it. And so if you need to just send that over to me, I'd really appreciate it. But I also want to raise the issue, and I know I've raised this issue before, around the charter requirements of City Council and the approval of the annual fiscal budget for the city and county of Denver. And so looking at any sort of movement of our municipal elections, Clerk Lopez, you just alluded to the size of our ballot is going to increase. And looking at moving municipal elections to November, that is going to directly conflict with City Council's responsibility around approving the annual budget by the second Monday of November every year, because everything's going to converge on these election years the beginning of November. And having run and facilitated a really successful council and administrative budget process in 2020, that is one of those issues that I haven't heard any solutions for, or heard any changes or how we might do that, because that would also be a charter change if council was going to change what that looks like, and I don't think that that's realistic. And so just would like to understand and hear a little bit more of your thoughts around how we can address that, because I think from a bandwidth and a capacity standpoint, that is going to be a huge hurdle to get over.
And I appreciate that, Councilwoman. I think, those are very valid points, and that's why we have council and so the legislative branch and the other part of the executive branch in the room too. And that's why we have these as public meetings, because those are definitely questions that we have to address. And that's why we are having this process, so we can have those kind of open aired address, blah, 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 blah. I forgot how to speak all of a sudden, too much coffee. No, that's why we can address some of these issues in the public and do it in an open process. And like I said, to all the folks who are participating in this, thank you. We'd rather do this in person, but we are where we're at. Councilwoman Gilmore, those are absolutely valid concerns. However, and one of the things I heard, going door to door, anytime I would talk about an election, oh yeah, November, right? No, man, May, June's the runoff. Another one? Yeah. So I can't tell you how many times that, I ran into that, and I continue to run into that, and that's common knowledge. But that's one of very many different decisions that we could take, that you all as council will end up considering in front of you and placing in front of voters in terms of a question or not. However, one of the things that is the low hanging fruit is that would also address the problem is making sure, we can continue to have a spring municipal election cycle, but giving us and giving voters more time on the front end. So you have this amount of time that you see right there in front of you, right? With the fixed date on the runoff for June, right? Given that extra time for the administrations to change and all that to take place, is what Councilman Flynn had talked about earlier. But one of the solutions is also giving us more time here, right? So expanding that time frame between the first municipal election and pushing it back to maybe April would also give us an opportunity for us to be able to be in the clear, to make sure that voters, whether they're here or whether Uocava voters abroad, have the same kind of opportunity to really look at the ballot, study the issues, study the candidates, and be able to make the same kind of decisions and informed decisions that folks who are here in town make as well. And I'm not trying to just have that as a conflict of those two, because part of the successful in Denver is that voters have time to vote and to use mail or drop boxes to vote. And, at the end of the day, we are at the mercy of, not in a bad way. I'm very, very proud of our mail carriers and our folks who are in the USPS, but we are at the mercy of the mail system as well too. So making sure that we have that time for that to take place as well. That's important. And then the fact that, we have a great vendor that prints our ballots. It's important for our staff to be able to design our ballots, get it out. We don't want to do it rushed, because when things happen in a way that's too rushed, that's when you have little mistakes. So there's a lot of different places there's a lot of different things that take place in the election administration side that we want to make sure folks have that opportunity to do. The model has changed, and frankly, our charter is the thing that needs to improve.
Mr. Clerk, a quick question. And I think you make a compelling argument for adjusting the calendar. I guess you could look at it on either end, depending on what consequence you're trying to avoid. Are there other tweaks that we can, if this is primarily an issue of stress on the office, so that elections are conducted, signature cures are taken care of, and recounts are managed in a way that you don't have a train wreck, are there tweaks in that in the existing calendar that can be made, or is that dictated already by law? Like, for example, you could say, hey, you don't have quite as much time to have a signature cure. Is that a naive question? It probably is, but I'm just trying to see if there are tweaks in the middle.
No, yeah.
This is a very complex system, right? And election administration is complex on the operation and the admin side, but we want to make it simple for folks in the public to understand, and that's part of our voter-centric model, right? So yes, there are some tweaks here and there, but one of the things that we want to do, and some of our folks are actually participants, are actually folks that are in our office, right? That are in charge of administration and operations. And so part of what we want to be able to do is take some of the feedback here and work within our office and see what's possible, right? And see what we could do. And you're talking about the best office in the country, right? Thank you, Stephanie. Thank you, folks who have been part of that change in our staff, right? In the public. So, and then also, Alan, you know me, man. I'm a former councilman. Don't ask me a question like that if I want to tweak something. There's all kinds of tweaks I want to make in this city, but it is what it is, right? So yes, short answer is yes. There are some things that are low hanging fruit, but the biggest consideration is this right here. We are throwing the dice by continuing to have a modern elections model in a car with no air conditioning. Well, charter, antiquated charter.
Yeah, and just to add on to that a little bit, we do have, so the deadlines that occur after election day, like cures and things like that, we've used our home rule authority to actually address those in ordinance. They do mirror state election law though, and so I think our one concern is if we want to shorten or condense those timelines on the back end, just changing the voter experience for what they're used to in all other elections compared to these elections, that's all. But those deadlines are actually in ordinance, so we could do that with the bill.
Yeah, I appreciate you answered the question, Dan. I'm not sure voters know that very much. They may have an experience with it, but my guess is they probably don't know or will not easily remember what their signature cure time frame is. But I take your point's well taken, and the clerk's concern also did not fall on deaf ears. Thank you.
Yeah, no, I appreciate that. We want to reiterate that, we're able to make something happen. Like there's a reason why we have not come into violations, because, folks we have a lot of experience in our office. We got a lot of talent. There's, we play through scenarios left and right. We've learned a lot over the years, right? In different iterations of this model as it has expanded. And I think one of the things that we have to, I really have to say is that we can handle a lot of this stuff, but it is really rolling the dice, right? All it takes is one time, and we got really close with my election to where we could have been in some trouble.
I do just want to say one thing that I think will kind of morph answering a couple of your questions. So I apologize. We have worked for many years now. Obviously, we're always trying to be more efficient. And a good example of that, like with the deadlines on the back end, is now we have something, we call it text to cure. So now instead of sending us a physical piece of mail back to cure your signature, take a picture of your ID on your smartphone, send us your signature, and then it's all instantaneous right there instead of us waiting on the mail again for you to cure your signature. So that's something, a really good example of some technology we've leaned on in order to help people cure in a better way and to meet the voter where they actually are on the community, right? But for as much as we do try to be very good at what we do and to be as efficient as possible, there's just points where it's a really hard conflict, and it does impact some of our voters. Part of what I think to an earlier question, I really wanted to just highlight this first red dot that you see, which is technically the military and overseas mailing deadline for that runoff election. Not every military and overseas voter that we have has opted for receiving their ballot like that, when we piloted with votes or electronically or something like that. Some of them still want their mail ballot. And when we have Peace Corps members in Africa or somewhere around the world, we're relying on the mail to get that to them. And there's just no way to mail something across the world within about 14 days. It's not a guarantee. And so we don't want to keep relying on, we saw what happened with the previous presidential administration as well in the post office. We kind of want to take that question out of it, and we want to try to help those voters as well.
Yeah, Clerk Lopez, my brother is a retired letter carrier, my younger brother. And so I don't want to speak ill of the USPS either, but just yesterday we got a returned Christmas card, undeliverable, to my brother-in-law, my wife's older brother, who lives just 2 miles away from here. And it was mailed on December 9th. So I agree there's a lot of challenges with all mail ballots and absentee. I just wanted to address Clerk Lopez. I have no doubt that you've run into people who said, there's an election, aren't they, in November? I understand that. When I was in a runoff in 2015, I had people say, why are you still running? You didn't win. I said, well, no, there's a runoff now in June. So, the voter education is a constant thing because there's always new voters, right? But I do want to point out that, I wanted to see data from voter turnout, and I haven't seen it yet from the races November, when the school board DPS moved to November, I think 1995, because I would suggest that when I looked at it, going back to about 1979, when I looked at the actual voter turnout for the at-large DPS races in November, there was less turnout in November than there was in the corresponding May. I don't know if that'll be true, if that was true in 2019 or in 2015, but I do want to see that data, because I think just to put the November, moving to November to bed, I don't think there's support for that because of the budget issues that Council President Gilmore mentioned. But also, I don't think it's necessarily true that voter turnout is greater in November, because it hasn't been true necessarily in those off years. Obviously, it's true in a presidential year, in the even year, but not in the off years. So I still do want to see that data.
Well, we're working on stuff like that, and those are very important points and very helpful points to make, Councilman, and input. I think what the worry here is, like I said, we have to brag, but we will continue to brag and knock on wood or particle board or whatever the hell this desk is made out of. We run the best shop in the business, and I think one of the things that we've been able to do is just not see any problems, because folks have been here for 3 decades, some of them, right? And I think there's a lot to be said about that, and we've made great stride in modernizing elections. Thank you, Clerk O'Malley. But what we don't want to do, and what we absolutely have to avoid to our core, is potentially disenfranchising voters. And we can't have that. We don't stand for that. Our job is to make it easy for folks to vote, to remove whatever barriers possible and give them different ways for them to be able to participate and vote. What we're running is a risk of potentially disenfranchising voters who are UACAPA voters, right? And we have to address that. And this is one of those things that we, have to consider that just as much as somebody here being disenfranchised to their vote, those things cannot happen. So this is one of the solutions, is to expand that time. You could even do that in the spring, expanding that time, right? So that we have a longer shot clock to make that play. Now, the other thing, and I have to agree with you, we have nothing but love for the USPS. Unfortunately, there's been an administration that have made some decisions that have really weakened it and really made some impossible scenarios for them. But we are a partner with USPS. There is, without a doubt, that mail-in ballots have empowered voters. They make it easy, and we want folks to be able to maximize their ability to be able to cast their vote and strengthen this democracy as a whole. With this model, it works, and so the object is to strengthen it here so that we can continue to be a leader and advocate for it all over the country.
Certainly, yeah. I think we should concentrate on fixing the issue that we have with the calendar, but fixing it in the spring. Going to November for the budget reasons and for turnout reasons, I think I think we ought to just drop that. So,
well, I mean, and I appreciate that, but one of the other things that we do have to address is the different models, right? We want, and I know you want this too, and we want as much discourse as possible, because there are also some modern ways of casting that ballot, right? And there are different ways that are being utilized around the country, and so that's why things like plurality or the conversation on plurality, ranked choice voting, right? All approval voting, all those different models. We want to use this as that forum for us to have that kind of public discussion. But yeah, the lowest hanging fruit right now that we're rolling the dice on is increasing that giving us a longer shot clock, giving voters a longer shot clock.
The next hand up is Mark Ruskin.
Thanks very much. I just want to say that certainly all of my experiences with the clerk's office and the election administration that the city does have reflected exactly the kind of professionalism and efficiency and customer service, which doesn't often get raised. But Clerk, my experience, and believe me, I've run a couple of tests, as in walking in with a utility bill just to see what that must feel like and getting a ballot. And I've never had anything but the best experience in that regard. I would say this, notwithstanding the professionalism and the experience and the attitude, that is nothing short of what one would hope for in an election administrator's office. I think Dan may have said we've been lucky. You have been lucky. And honestly, as somebody who practices off and on in the election arena, I would say that 2020 gave birth to a notion that litigation is the norm rather than the exception to assessing election results. I would hope that in Denver, people don't look at litigation, particularly litigation that isn't founded in a specific issue that has frustrated the undertaking of the voter. But I, as long as we are readdressing this, I think it ought to be readdressed in a way that doesn't make timely and accurate election results contingent upon luck. And if that means we need to build in a little bit more time, whether that's time for a contest to play out, or alternatively, additional time for UCAVA voters to consider their new options. I think that's a positive for the system. Now, I don't think it needs to be a tremendous amount of time, but I wouldn't cut it quite so close to the vest when you know that that's kind of been the track record that you've had to rely on. This is not a criticism and just the opposite, but as long as we're improving the system, let's improve some parts that sometimes spin out of control of election administrators. Thanks.
Hey, knowing that you're a secret shopper out there makes me want to do it more. Thank you.
Okay, Andy, did we have any more hands raised? I'm sorry.
I do not see that, and Grace's computer is restarting currently, so she may need just a moment.
Hey, Dan, I didn't put my hand up, so I apologize.
No problem.
But I thought, Mark, probably there's no one more experienced with election law than Mark Ruskin. And I think what I heard him say is that if we can construct a system that limits litigation that is kind of not based in real claims, but more political litigation to play out the election and have litigation be a corrosive thing, then we ought to try and make those improvements. I think that was a very strong argument from a strong voice, respected voice.
Thank you. Yeah, no, we very much appreciate the comments from Mr. Gruskin. I think they raise, a point of what we're trying to do here, which is really just to raise a flag and say, we can't do this again. We've cut it close and we can't do this again. So I know some of the options people don't like, that's totally fine. But we did feel like if we were going to crack open the charter and talk about election administration, it's time to evaluate pretty much everything in front of us to make sure we're doing this right now. And quite honestly, this is a process that for us is also voter education. When we hear things like, why isn't the election in November? Well, now we have these really nice videos on our website, which is a record of why we can't do that. So in a really weird way, this was voter education for us as well, so that we could have a truly honest, open, and deliberative process so that everyone understands how we got to the result that we came to, hopefully. So, and with that stall, I will see if Grace has got her computer back up and running before kicking it over to her. Maybe not, might have to stall some more.
It's okay, Dan, this is Celia. I can jump in. So good afternoon, everybody. I'm Celia Reyes Martinez. I am the manager of community engagement for the Clerk and Recorder's Office. And I have a really great team, Brandy and Danielle. Hopefully they have reached out or you've heard from them already, but our team has been working really hard to do some community engagement around the charter review. We have been working really hard to get comments that we will be able to submit to this committee at the end of this month. We also have a survey that I'll talk a little bit more about, but then we're going to be doing some work to get some more comments for when we go to present to City Council. We'll have more comments that we can get from the community. So some of the way that we're doing this work is that we have been doing a lot of presentations to stakeholders like registered neighborhood associations, to nonprofit groups, community groups, civic engagement or civic participation organizations, and a partisan House district meeting. So my team has just been out there really presenting and getting this information in front of people. We are also using social media, Facebook. We started a Nextdoor account, which has been really successful in promoting the survey. We have been doing in-person engagement. My team was just out earlier this week out in the cold getting comments from people in the Montbello area and in Blair Caldwell Library. And we've been doing some presentations, including Facebook Live events. So we have another presentation coming up on the 24th of this month. It's going to be open to the public so they can hear, they can understand a little bit of what's going on, and hopefully be able to provide us some feedback. And then the online survey, we started it earlier this month, and as of today, we're at 700 surveys completed that we have received. Our goal is 1,000. But so we're almost there, but we have really been promoting this survey in hopes of getting community feedback. So far, we've done a good job collecting survey answers from across the city. And again, my team, Brandy and Danielle, have really just been out there getting this information. And we're also using this opportunity to make sure, like Dan said, that we're talking to voters and letting them know, hey, there's going to be an election in November, right? Are you registered to vote? And using this as an opportunity to have those conversations to make sure that we are letting people know that there's an election and that they should keep their voter registration updated. So that's a little bit of the work that we've been doing, but huge shout out to both Brandy and Danielle from my team, and then Amy, who has been doing a lot of support with the survey and promotion of the survey. Does anybody have any questions for me about our community engagement work that we've been doing?
Very impressive.
Yeah.
Thank you. You want to come work for the mayor?
Hey, quit poaching
I'm
my
kidding.
people, Alan.
Yeah, it's very impressive. Well, I guess one question I have is, are you getting any kind of common themes from people?
So right now we haven't really taken, we've been getting the comments that we see are really, like, I like this idea or I like that idea. But again, Amy from our team has been doing that. So I don't have the top ideas right now, but we're going to be separating them into, a lot of them are just like, thank you for including us and asking and bringing the survey. So we're separating those from like those comments of, I really support this type of voting or that type of voting, but we'll have all of that for the committee at the beginning of next month. We're closing the survey on the 28th of February. So we want to go till the last day of February, and then my team will get together to look through that data and be able to present something to you all so you can see where the comments came from and what type of comments came in.
Thank
you. And folks, you could see that I mean, part of a lot of this work is, especially during the pandemic, is taking what we're, taking what we're doing now and what we're working on into the communities and every nook and cranny, every zip code, every council district, just trying to get that input. We will continue to do that engagement. Democracy doesn't just happen one day out of the week, right? Or one day out of the year, or just during the election cycle. It happens year round, and it's that kind of engagement and making sure that folks are aware of what's happening, have that opportunity to participate. But then also we're providing, voter registration services and things like that throughout, right? I think it's muscle memory. It's building muscle memory, and it's, and that's what we're trying to do, and continuing to do. That's why you have that kind of participation. I mean, you don't get 86% in a presidential election like we did last year with, the vast majority of these ballots, so I think 76% of them being turned in before Monday and Tuesday of election day, right? And at one point during the state primary, we had 99% of those folks return their ballots and not come in person, right? So it is a heavy lift, and it's an amazing lift. And you even have folks who were crunching the numbers, providing that data for our elections. You have folks like Steve Sharp in the office, and Paul Huntsberger, who's created the ballot trace 2.0. There's just, so all this fits in a pretty wicked mosaic of democracy in this city, and that's why we don't we're humble about it, but take the time to be able to say, Denver voters, y'all have a great model here, and what we don't want to do is throw the dice on something like that. I want to continue to have it. So you guys do a tremendous job. So the staff, great job. So any other questions? I'm sorry, Andy, Dan.
No, I was just going to say the same thing. You know, our engagement team has been doing a really good work, and they are, you know, boots on the ground, trying to listen to voters, communicate with the voters, and make sure that we can translate, you know, as many comments from voters to you and put them into your hands so that you can consider those when you're making your recommendation to us. So thank you very much to Celia and her team. All right. Well, that actually brings, oh, I gotta click on this again. There we go. This brings kind of a wrap up, even though it's not a true wrap up of this process. Clearly, there's still more to do, but this is the last set meeting of this original 6 that we set out. And now we really want to, you know, make sure that we kind of hand this over to you all and say, you know, you've heard a lot of these options. What questions do you have as you deliberate more on this? What speakers do you want to have? Obviously, the conversation with Councilman Flynn, that was a really good idea. We will now go reach out to somebody in the southern states and figure out how they do it and see how it actually looks administratively. But if you, as you enter this deliberative phase, or for what we view as a deliberative phase, if you have any questions, if you have someone that you want to hear from and you want us to help facilitate that for the group, please let us know. Our original idea was to have a recommendation to Clerk Lopez and for the city, frankly, by the end of March. We have, you know, facilitated a point where you can ask election staff questions if you are going through this and you have questions of the election staff. But I just want to get a sense from the group of whether you think that is a doable timeline. We want to make sure that we don't just kind of do these 6 meetings and then poof into the ether. So if anyone has any thoughts or concerns about that timeline, please let us know, or please speak now even, so that we know if we need to adjust something. The other question we have for you is, you know, the formality of coming up with a recommendation. So when we originally set up with this idea, we thought that perhaps all 7 of you would just write out, you know, what your recommendation is, why you're making that recommendation, and perhaps why you're even not making any of the other recommendations, or why you don't think the other solutions are right at this point. Do you want to go with that approach where all 7 of you write something and we just compile them together? Or do you want to essentially designate a leader amongst the 7 of you and come up with one recommendation and one narrative out of the 7? So we would love to hear your thoughts about those issues.
I personally, I think that the clerk's office being the one to compile, you know, common themes among each one of the committee members seems appropriate. I think that's a very appropriate role for the clerk's office, and you know, I'd be happy to assist with that for sure, and you know, pulling out common themes and things like that to try to come up with you know, recommendation. But I do think that it makes the most sense to have each one of us kind of write up a little bit of something. I personally think that would be good. And I also think that it would be good to have an opportunity post having that written up and having that consolidation to come together again for a conversation to make sure that it is clarified and that, you know, what has been captured is accurate for all of the members and that we don't feel like something is being captured incorrectly. That's my 2 cents personally.
Oh, that's a great idea. Councilman?
Dan, I would like to have, before we formalize something, I would like to have a spreadsheet that tells us exactly how jurisdictions that use the runoff comply with UOVACA. What are their methods for doing that, so that we can make an informed choice on the runoff. Thanks.
No problem. We will get going on
Hey,
that.
Kevin Flynn, Councilman Flynn, I'm going to pick on you. Did you just say UOVACA? Did you call me a cow in Spanish?
UOVACA. That's like that's like when I was I was at the sushi place the other day, and we had a Salvadoran sushi chef, and I asked for soy sauce, and I said, "Soy sauce, I am sauce."
I couldn't help myself. I'm sorry. It used to happen on the dais. This is the old me. That was the old me. I'm sorry.
Hey, mi vecino.
I know. Much love to you, man.
So in addition to the data that Councilman Flynn is asking for, I think it would prove helpful in light of this conversation too, to just have some specific data on participation of UOCAVA voters
Hmm.
in Denver from the last, I don't know, however many elections that you deem appropriate, but I do want to see that data from the general to the runoff, just to see, if there's some decline or what the participation rate is. I think that would be helpful.
We can definitely get that.
And building on Stephanie's comment, which I think is really important, and if you have this information or if it is easily assembled, the time frame over which UOCAVA votes come in. I don't mean they come in, within 2 weeks, but do you see that there are particularly heavy return times as opposed to others? And I'll be candid. My issue, based on an earlier comment I made, is are we affording UOCAVA voters enough time to evaluate, particularly in a runoff situation, a new field and assimilate as much information as they can garner in order to make the choice that they think is best for the city.
So thank you. We will absolutely get to work on those. Not sure off the top of my head if we have the data about when they're returned, or if we still have that if we did, but I will figure that out for you. I will chat with the election staff and see what we can get for you all. And those are all very, very good points. So I think what we'll do is we'll plan on everyone writing their own thing. We'll get the data to you first, obviously. We don't expect you to give us a recommendation tomorrow. We'll plan on that. We'll set aside a time where we can come together and review what gets compiled from the 7 of you to make sure that it is accurate and we're not misrepresenting anything. And we'll work on getting that data to you as well as soon as possible so that you guys can make some informed decisions. But obviously, if anything else pops in your brain of what you might want from us, please obviously email us and we'll get to work on crunching the numbers.
Hey, Dan, one last thing. Can you all do an overlay of the calendar on the municipal election with an overlay of the city's budget timeline and time frame? Because Councilman Gilmore, brings up a very good point relative to the movement to November. I just want to see that, aligned one with the other. What are the dates and times that conflict that perhaps are prohibitive of moving to November?
So a November election timeline with the budget timeline. Is that what you're asking? Okay.
Yes.
Okay. All right. With that, I'm going to actually turn this over to the clerk, who's going to impart some parting words on this.
I really appreciate that, and thank you, Dan. Thank you so much for facilitating these meetings yourself and Andy Saqueres in the office. Andy, I'm always going to pronounce it with an accent. It's just what I do. So thank you all, and thank you everybody for participating. Those of you who are participating, this is God. I don't know what's going on. I just cannot speak today. Those of you who are participating in this, we really appreciate that. Know that this is going to be available, and so you're going to actually be able to share this on Facebook and stuff. We want to get as many comments in as possible, as much input in as possible. I mean, it hurts all of our inner community organizer hearts to not be out in the community doing this in a series of town halls all throughout, the city. But the next great opportunities for us to be able to capture this. So feel free to share this. Feel free to go back to your groups, to your communities, share this information, make sure they get that opportunity to opine in. We are very interested in hearing from folks. This is the participation side of democracy, right? And so, and it is our old Model A charter that we need to modernize when it comes to elections. So we do want to make sure that we do this in a way that involves you all. And I want to thank the panelists. So Council President Gilmore, and thank you so much for your participation, for your thoughtfulness in this. Councilman Flynn, it is absolutely critical that we have the participation and the partnership through council, right? The legislative branch is absolutely critical. All of us working together with the executive branch and legislative branch in a way that is functional and in a way that, you know, puts some of these processes in the public view, and we have that opportunity to have that input. To Jenna, thank you so much. This is, you know, from being, you know, our representative, one of the representatives of the community, and being able to really vet this with a lot of the folks on the ground. It's absolutely critical. Stephanie O'Malley, our clerk, our first ever elected clerk. You know, you are absolutely, the work that you did, and those of you who are paying attention on this, you know, Denver moved to have an elected clerk for the first time ever, right? In a very long time. And I think, you know, it was a move that we did that was really wise back in the day, to make sure that the position is independent, that oversight of elections is independent. And you had a huge task of really being the agent of change, to making sure that, you know, the old model is now modernized, and you help put the system in place to modernize the elections. And you don't get a lot of credit for that. It's hard work, a heavy lift, and I want to do that publicly. So thank you to our first elected clerk, Stephanie O'Malley. Alan, thank you so much for representing the mayor's office. Mark, you are probably the guy when it comes to elections law in this city. You are an amazing asset to us, and just having your eyes look at this. You are truly a gem for the public in terms of having that eye on us in this process. And now that you're a secret shopper, guys, Mark Gruskin is a secret shopper. He's testing our stuff, and he has a wicked law degree. So let's make sure that we're on our stuff now, minding our P's and Q's. So with that, thank you all for participating, and our staff, Celia, and then all the folks in our elections division that work really hard to make this happen, right? It's their experience, their combined experience, their ability to be able to do this in a realm where you know, the public has the utmost confidence in what we do in a time where we absolutely need it. So anyway, Dan, I'll take it over to you to wrap up.
Well, thank you, Clerk. I kind of stole my own thunder when I was stalling for grace, but like I said, you know, we very much approached this with open deliberation. We wanted to lay everything out on the table. We did see this as, you know, also an opportunity for voter education, to make sure that people understood what we were why we were doing what we were doing. So I just want to say thank you very much for doing this for us. We greatly appreciate it. That will wrap up this meeting. Please watch your emails. We'll email you again about setting up that review time, and probably a few more just follow-up details for recommendations. And we'll also email you all of the data that you have requested. We will get that to you as well. Okay.
Thanks to the clerk and his staff, Paul, leadership. This is what it looks like. Thank you. And Dan, you've been extraordinary. So just on behalf of myself and the mayor's office, just want to thank you all for the professionalism with which you've handled this.
Yes, thank you, Dan.
Yes,
Thank
definitely.
you.
Thank you.
Thank you. You all have a
Thanks
good day.
much.
Thank you.
Adelante, gracias.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.